they said humanity was extinct. For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had told this lie to every species they conquered, every world they enslaved, every civilization they ground beneath their boot heels. Earth was nothing but cosmic dust, they claimed. The humans were a cautionary tale of what happened to species that dared resist the Empire's might. But legends have a way of surviving even the most brutal attempts to bury them. In the furthest reaches of known space, where ancient star charts marked only emptiness and the whispered warnings of the void that hungers, something stirred in the darkness. Massive shapes, larger than any dreadnought in the Empire's fleet, began to move with purpose through the black. Their hulls bore scars from battles fought when the galaxy was young, their weapon systems hummed with technologies that predated the Empire's rise to power. The humans hadn't just survived their supposed extinction, they had evolved, adapted, and prepared. And, now, after millennia of exile in the deep dark, they were coming home to reclaim what was rightfully theirs. The Zephyrian Empire, drunk on 3,000 years of unopposed conquest, was about to learn why humanity had once been feared across the galaxy. They were about to discover that some species don't just fight back when cornered, they become something far more dangerous. The ancient Earth battleships were returning, and they were nothing like the primitive vessels the Empire remembered destroying so long ago. Admiral Kekstar of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy had seen many things in his 4 decades of service. He had witnessed the subjugation of 12 star systems, commanded the bombardment of countless rebellious worlds, and personally overseen the execution of 3 species that had dared to defy the Empire's expansion. Nothing in the galaxy could surprise him anymore, or so he believed until his sensor operator's tentacles began trembling with fear. "Admiral, you need to see this," Communications Officer Velna whispered, her voice barely audible above the steady hum of the bridge systems aboard the Imperial dreadnought Sovereign's Wrath. The massive warship, stretching nearly 2 kilometers from bow to stern, represented the pinnacle of Zephyrian military engineering and had never encountered anything it couldn't destroy. Kekstar's 4 eyes narrowed as he approached the holographic display. His scaled hide, marked with the ritual scars of countless victories, reflected the blue glow of the tactical readout. What he saw there defied everything he understood about space warfare and galactic politics. "Impossible," he muttered, his forked tongue flicking out to taste the recycled air. The readings showed massive objects emerging from hyperspace at the edge of the Kepler 442 system, but these weren't ordinary ships. The energy signatures were unlike anything in Imperial databases, and the sheer size of the contacts made his own dreadnought look like a patrol craft. "Sir, the contacts they're enormous," the sensor operator reported, his voice cracking. "The largest reads at over 15 kilometers in length. Their energy output is off our scales, and they're using technology we don't recognize." 15 kilometers. Kekstar had to grip the command chair to steady himself. The largest ships in the Imperial fleet barely reached 3 kilometers, and those were considered engineering marvels. These mysterious vessels were 5 times that size, appearing like ancient leviathans rising from the depths of space itself. "Origin?" Kekstar demanded, though he already suspected the answer would be unsatisfactory. "Unknown, sir. They materialized from a vector that leads to nothing. Empty space according to all our charts. The region has been marked as a void zone for over 3,000 years. 3,000 years. The numbers sent a chill down Kekstar's spine that had nothing to do with the ship's climate control. 3,000 years ago, the Empire had fought its most brutal campaign against a species that had nearly brought their expansion to a halt. A species that had been completely eradicated, their homeworld reduced to asteroidal debris, their colonies burned to glass. "Humans! Get me a visual," Kekstar ordered, his voice steadier than he felt. The main display shifted, and the bridge fell silent. The ships that appeared on screen were clearly ancient, their hulls bearing the patina of age and the scars of countless battles. But there was nothing primitive about them. Their lines were sleek yet predatory, like knives forged from starlight and shadow. Weapon ports dotted their surfaces in configurations that suggested firepower beyond Imperial comprehension. The lead vessel was the largest, a behemoth that seemed to bend space around itself. Its hull was a deep black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, and strange geometric patterns etched along its sides pulsed with an inner glow that hurt to look at directly. This was clearly a flagship, and it was heading straight for the Imperial patrol fleet with purpose that brooked no negotiation. "Incoming transmission," Velna announced, her voice barely above a whisper. On screen. The face that appeared on the main display was definitely human, though changed by millennia of adaptation. The features were sharper than Kextar remembered from historical records, the eyes a brilliant blue that seemed to hold depths of cold intelligence. Scars marked the pale skin, and the hair was white as starlight despite the apparent youth of the face. "I am Admiral Sarah Chen of the Terran Deep Fleet," the human said, her voice carrying an accent that suggested Standard Galactic was not her primary language. "You are trespassing in human space." Kextar's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his species. "Human space? Humans have been extinct for 3 millennia. I don't know what species you represent, but your claim is both ridiculous and irrelevant. This system belongs to the Zephyrian Empire by right of conquest." The human's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in those blue eyes. "Extinct? Is that what you told yourselves? How convenient." She paused, and, when she continued, her words carried the weight of absolute certainty. "Let me correct your historical records, Admiral. Humans were never extinct. We were exiled. There's a difference." "Exiled?" Kextar scoffed. "Our records clearly show." "Your records show what you wanted them to show," Admiral Chen interrupted. "You destroyed our colonies, burned our worlds, and scattered our fleets. But you never found our deep space habitats, our generation ships, our hidden bases in the void between stars. For 3,000 years, we've been out there, growing stronger, building better ships, and waiting for the right moment to return." The implications hit Kextar like a plasma bolt to the chest. If these really were humans, if they had somehow survived and spent 3 millennia preparing for revenge, then the Empire faced a threat unlike anything in recorded history. "Even if what you claim is true," Kextar said, forcing confidence into his voice, "you're facing the full might of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy. Your handful of ships, no matter how large, cannot stand against our entire fleet." Admiral Chen's lips curved in what might charitably be called a smile. "Handful of ships?" She touched something off-screen, and the tactical display exploded with new contacts. Dozens of massive vessels began decloaking throughout the system, their stealth technology so advanced that Imperial sensors hadn't detected them until they chose to reveal themselves. "This is Battle Group Omega," Chen continued conversationally. "One of our smaller formations. We have 17 other battle groups currently moving through Imperial space, liberating the systems you stole from us and our allies 3,000 years ago." Kextar felt his blood turn to ice water. 17 other battle groups? Each with dozens of ships the size of small space stations? The mathematics of such a fleet were staggering, implying a military-industrial complex that dwarfed the Empire's capabilities. "You're bluffing," he said, but even he could hear the doubt in his voice. "Am I?" Chen leaned forward, and her expression hardened. "Let me tell you something about humans, Admiral. We don't bluff. We plan. For 3,000 years, we've planned for this moment. We studied your tactics, reverse-engineered your technology, and built something better. We evolved, adapted, and prepared. And now we're going to take back everything you stole from us, starting with this system." The sensor operator's voice cracked as he reported new contacts. "Admiral, I'm reading massive energy spikes from the human vessels. Their weapons are powering up." Kextar looked at his own fleet, 12 ships including his dreadnought, all veteran vessels with experienced crews. Under normal circumstances, they could pacify an entire rebellious world. But these weren't normal circumstances, and these weren't normal enemies. "This is your only warning," Admiral Chen said, her voice carrying the finality of a death sentence. "Withdraw from this system immediately, or we will demonstrate why the galaxy once feared humanity." Kextar had spent 4 decades building his reputation as an admiral who never backed down, who never retreated, who never showed weakness in the face of enemy threats. But, as he stared at those massive human ships with their unknown weapons and impossible technology, he felt something he hadn't experienced since his first battle as a junior officer. Fear. "Admiral," his tactical officer whispered urgently. "Our wargame scenarios show we have less than a 12% chance of survival if we engage." Less than 12%. Against an enemy they had believed extinct for 3 millennia. An enemy that had spent that time preparing for revenge. "Open a channel to the fleet," Kekstar ordered, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sir?" "All ships, prepare to withdraw to hyperspace. Emergency jump protocols." The bridge fell silent. In the history of the Zephyrian Imperial Navy, no admiral had ever ordered a retreat without firing a single shot. But, as Kekstar watched those ancient human battleships hanging in space like predators waiting to strike, he knew that history would have to be rewritten. Because humanity hadn't just returned from the dead. They had returned as something far more dangerous than they had ever been before. "Withdrawal complete in 30 seconds, the navigation officer reported. On the screen, Admiral Chan nodded with grim satisfaction. "Wise choice, Admiral. Return to your superiors and tell them this: the children of Earth have come home, and we remember everything you did to us. The Zephyrian Empire's 3,000-year reign of terror ends now." As the Sovereign's wrath jumped to hyperspace, carrying news that would shake the Empire to its foundations, Admiral Chan turned to her own officers. The bridge of the battleship Retribution was a marvel of human engineering, combining technologies developed in exile with innovations born from desperation and nurtured by revenge. "Signal the other battle groups," she ordered. "Phase 1 is complete. The Empire knows we exist, and they know we're not the same species they defeated before. Now comes the real work." Her first officer, a man whose cybernetic enhancements gleamed in the dim lighting, nodded grimly. "Orders, Admiral?" Chen stared out at the stars that had once belonged to humanity's allies, worlds now ground under the Empire's heel. Somewhere out there were the descendants of species that had fought alongside humans 3,000 years ago, now enslaved and broken by centuries of imperial rule. "Begin Phase 2, she said quietly. "It's time to remind the galaxy what happens when you back humans into a corner. We don't just survive. We evolve." The emergency session of the Zephyrian High Command had been called within hours of Admiral Kekstar's humiliating retreat from the Kepler 442 system. The massive war room deep within the Imperial Fortress world of Zirion Prime buzzed with tension as the Empire's most powerful military leaders gathered around the holographic tactical display that now showed the impossible: human ships operating freely in Imperial space. Supreme Admiral Thane Corvex, veteran of 60 years of conquest and expansion, stood at the head of the obsidian table with his forearms crossed behind his back. His ceremonial armor, inscribed with the names of conquered worlds, seemed to weigh heavily on his shoulders as he absorbed the reports flooding in from across the Empire's borders. 17 confirmed battle groups, Intelligence Director SIXNAR reported, her cybernetic eye whirring as it processed data streams. Each containing between 20 and 40 vessels of unprecedented size and capability. Conservative estimates put their combined firepower at roughly 10 times our own. The silence that followed was deafening. 10 times their firepower. The Zephyrian Empire had spent 3 millennia building what they believed was the most powerful military force in galactic history. Their fleets had crushed every rebellion, conquered every resistance, and established imperial dominance across 47 star systems. The idea that they could be so catastrophically outgunned was beyond comprehension. "How is this possible?" demanded General Vex Kalen, his scarred hide bearing witness to countless ground campaigns. "Our historical records clearly show that we destroyed human civilization completely. Their homeworld was reduced to debris. Their colonies were burned to glass. Their fleets were scattered and hunted to extinction." Supreme Admiral Thane Corvex activated his personal data pad, bringing up classified files that only the highest levels of Imperial Command were permitted to see. "Perhaps it's time we examined what our predecessors actually accomplished 3,000 years ago." The holographic display shifted, showing stellar cartography from the ancient war. The human sphere of influence had been vast, encompassing dozens of star systems and countless colonies. But, as the timeline progressed, it became clear that the Empire's victory had been less complete than popular history suggested. According to these classified records, the Supreme Admiral continued, "Our forces destroyed 67 confirmed human colonies and scattered their main battle fleet." However, intelligence reports from that era indicate that humanity had established deep space habitats, generation ships, and hidden bases in regions we couldn't locate. Couldn't locate, or didn't bother to look? Director SYXNAR's question carried dangerous implications. Thane Corvex's expression darkened. It appears our predecessors chose to declare the human threat eliminated rather than commit the resources necessary to hunt down every last survivor. They were satisfied with breaking human power and driving them from known space. The weight of that decision now pressed down on the war room like a physical force. 3,000 years ago, imperial admirals had chosen expedience over thoroughness, and now their descendants faced the consequences of that choice. Tactical assessment, Thane Korvax ordered. Admiral Kekthera, the Empire's foremost strategic analyst, stepped forward. Her reputation for cold, precise military logic made her one of the most feared officers in the fleet. Based on Admiral Kekstar's encounter and subsequent intelligence gathering, we're facing an enemy that has spent 3 millennia preparing specifically for war against us. Their ships utilize technologies we don't understand, deploy in formations we can't counter, and possess firepower that makes our heaviest dreadnoughts look like patrol craft. She manipulated the display, showing detailed scans of the human vessels. Their flagship, which they call the Retribution, measures over 15 kilometers in length and mounts weapons systems that appear to channel some form of exotic energy we can't identify. Our best estimates suggest a single broadside from that ship could destroy our largest dreadnought. General Vexcalen slammed his fist on the table. Then, we overwhelm them with numbers. The Empire has over 3,000 ships of the line. Even if each of their vessels is superior to ours, we can drown them in firepower. Can we? Admiral Kekthera's question was quietly devastating. Intelligence reports suggest they have at least 400 ships in their deep fleet, not counting support vessels, carriers, and logistics craft. But, more importantly, they're not operating alone. The display changed again, showing intercepts from across Imperial space. Rebellion was breaking out on dozens of worlds simultaneously, and the timing was too precise to be coincidental. They're coordinating with resistance movements throughout our territory, Director SIXNAR reported. Species we conquered centuries ago are suddenly receiving advanced weapons and tactical support. The Kitharan insurgency destroyed an entire Imperial garrison yesterday using weapons technology that matches energy signatures from the human ships. Supreme Admiral Thane Korvax absorbed this information with growing unease. The humans weren't just returning to reclaim their territory. They were systematically dismantling the Empire's control structure by supporting every oppressed species and resistance movement across Imperial space. It's elegant, he admitted grudgingly. Rather than engaging our main fleet in direct confrontation, they're forcing us to spread our forces thin defending our holdings. Every ship we send to suppress a rebellion is a ship that can engage their battle groups. The holographic display updated with new intelligence, and the situation became even more dire. Human forces had liberated 3 star systems in the past 72 hours, establishing defensive positions that would require massive fleets to dislodge. But, worse than the territorial losses was the psychological impact on Imperial forces. Morale reports are troubling, Director SIXNAR admitted reluctantly. Word is spreading through the fleet that humans have returned from extinction. Many species within our ranks remember the ancient legends about human combat effectiveness. Some are questioning whether they want to face an enemy that supposedly survived annihilation and spent 3,000 years planning revenge. This was perhaps the most dangerous development of all. The Zephyrian Empire ruled through fear and the perception of invincibility. If their own forces began to doubt Imperial supremacy, the entire structure of control could collapse from within. We need to demonstrate strength, General Vexcalen insisted. A decisive victory against these returning humans would crush both their offensive and the morale problems in our ranks. With what? Admiral Kekthera's question was brutally direct. Our wargames indicate that even our largest fleet concentration has minimal chance of success against a human battle group. We don't understand their technology, we can't predict their tactics, and we have no idea what other capabilities they've developed during their exile. Supreme Admiral Thane Korvax studied the tactical displays with the experience of 6 decades in uniform. The situation was unprecedented in Imperial history, but certain patterns were becoming clear. They're testing us, he said finally. These initial engagements are reconnaissance in force, designed to evaluate our current capabilities and responses. They're learning everything about how we fight while revealing as little as possible about their own methods. Which means? Director SIXNAR prompted. Which means the real attack hasn't begun yet. The words hung in the air like a death sentence. If everything they had seen so far was merely probing attacks, what would the humans' main offensive look like? Recommendations, the Supreme Admiral asked. Admiral Kekthara activated her own tactical display. We have 3 options, none of them appealing. First, we can attempt to negotiate some form of peace treaty, acknowledging human territorial claims in exchange for cessation of hostilities. The suggestion was met with growls and hisses of outrage from around the table. The Zephyrian Empire did not negotiate with enemies. It conquered them. Second, she continued, we can consolidate our forces and attempt to engage them in decisive battle, accepting massive casualties in hopes of breaking their offensive capability. Casualty estimates for such an engagement? Thane Corvex asked. 70 to 80% fleet losses, assuming we can even force them to accept battle on our terms. The numbers were staggering. Even if they succeeded in defeating the humans, the Empire would be left defenseless against the dozens of other species that would inevitably revolt in the aftermath. Third option, the Supreme Admiral prompted. Strategic withdrawal to defensive positions while we attempt to reverse engineer their technology and develop countermeasures. Essentially, we abandon our outer territories and consolidate around our core systems. The idea of voluntary retreat was anathema to everything the Empire represented, but, as Thane Corvex studied the tactical situation, he began to see the wisdom in such an approach. How long would we need, he asked. Unknown. Their technology appears to be based on principles we don't understand. It could take decades to develop effective counters, assuming it's even possible. Decades of defensive warfare against an enemy that had spent 3 millennia preparing for exactly this conflict. The odds were not favorable. A priority alert chimed through the war room's communication system, and Director SYXNAR's cybernetic eye whirred as she processed the incoming data. New intelligence from the Proxima sector, she announced, her voice tight with controlled fear. The humans have begun Phase 2 of their operation. The display changed to show live feeds from across Imperial space. Massive human ships were appearing at industrial worlds, mining colonies, and logistics hubs throughout the Empire's infrastructure network. They weren't conquering these locations, they were systematically destroying them. They're targeting our supply lines, Admiral Kekthara observed with professional admiration. Military bases can be rebuilt, but industrial capacity takes generations to replace. Supreme Admiral Thane Corvex watched as humanity's revenge unfolded across the holographic display. Shipyards that had taken centuries to construct were being reduced to expanding clouds of debris. Mining operations that fed the Empire's war machine were being systematically eliminated. The humans weren't just trying to defeat Imperial forces, they were dismantling the entire foundation of Imperial power. Estimated time until our industrial capacity drops below critical military needs, he asked. At their current rate of destruction, approximately 6 months, Director SIXNAR replied. 6 months. In half a year, the Zephyrian Empire would lack the industrial base necessary to maintain its military forces. Ships would lack replacement parts, weapons would run short of ammunition, and the vast logistical network that enabled Imperial control would simply cease to function. They're not trying to conquer us, Thane Corvex realized with growing horror. They're trying to collapse our entire civilization. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. This wasn't a war in any conventional sense. It was systematic revenge carried out with the precision and patience that only 3 millennia of planning could achieve. Orders, Supreme Admiral? Admiral Kekthara asked. Thane Corvex stared at the display showing the dissolution of everything the Empire had built over 3,000 years. For the first time in his military career, he had no clear tactical solution to offer. Prepare contingency plans for all 3 options, he said finally. And pray to whatever gods still listen that we can find a 4th. As the war room emptied and the Empire's leaders dispersed to their commands, none of them noticed the small energy signature that had been monitoring their discussions. Deep in the void between stars, the human stealth ship Wraith's Edge processed the intelligence it had gathered and transmitted it back to Admiral Chen aboard the Retribution. The humans weren't just winning the war. They were rewriting the rules of warfare itself. And the Empire was finally beginning to understand just how thoroughly they had underestimated the species they thought they had destroyed 3,000 years ago. Captain Elena Vasquez had been dead for 3,000 years, yet she stood on the bridge of the UES Prometheus watching the orbital defense platforms of Kepler Prime burn like funeral pyres against the star-filled void. Her fingers, augmented with quantum processors that allowed her to interface directly with her ship's systems, danced across holographic displays as she coordinated the liberation of humanity's first colony world. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had died defending this very planet when the Zephyrian Empire first arrived with their conquest fleets, her consciousness uploaded to the ship's quantum matrix in the final moments before her original body was vaporized by enemy fire. Now, after millennia of existence as living software within humanity's deep fleet, she was finally coming home. Planetary defense grid is down to 30% functionality, reported Lieutenant Commander Zhang, his own augmented form seamlessly integrated with the ship's tactical systems. Like all members of the Deep Fleet, the boundary between human consciousness and artificial intelligence had long since blurred. They were something new, something evolved, something that the galaxy's biological species couldn't comprehend. Zephyrian ground forces are requesting immediate evacuation, added the communications officer, her voice carrying the barely contained satisfaction of long-delayed justice. They're offering unconditional surrender. Captain Vasquez studied the tactical display showing the once beautiful world below. Kepler Prime had been humanity's crown jewel, a garden world where Earth's children had built cities that harmonized with the planet's natural ecosystems. Under Imperial rule, it had become an industrial wasteland, strip-mined and polluted to feed the Empire's war machine. 3,000 years of environmental destruction stretched below them, but Captain Vasquez could still see echoes of what the world had once been. Her enhanced memory banks contained perfect recordings of Kepler Prime's crystalline cities, its flowering meadows, the laughter of human children playing in parks that no longer existed. Captain, Lieutenant Commander Zhang said softly, "We're receiving a transmission from the planet's surface. It's on an old emergency frequency. Human origin." Vasquez felt something that might have been her heart skip a beat, though she no longer possessed such primitive biological organs. On screen, the face that appeared was unmistakably human, though aged beyond what should have been possible with modern medical technology. The woman who stared back at them had skin marked by decades of hard labor, eyes that spoke of unimaginable suffering, and the hollow cheeks of chronic malnutrition. "This is Dr. Sarah Kim, formerly of the Kepler Prime Colonial Authority," the woman said, her voice hoarse with exhaustion. "If anyone from the fleet survived, if anyone is still listening to these old channels, we're still here. There are still humans on Kepler Prime." The bridge fell silent. Intelligence reports had indicated that all human populations in Imperial space had been eliminated centuries ago, either through direct extermination or forced assimilation that had erased their identity. The possibility that survivors still existed was something the Deep Fleet had hoped for but never dared to assume. "How many?" Vasquez asked, opening a communication channel. Dr. Kim's face transformed with hope and disbelief. "You're real. Oh God, you're actually real. We've been monitoring Imperial communications about mysterious ships, but we never dared to believe." She wiped tears from her eyes with hands that shook from emotion. "There are approximately 12,000 of us left, hidden in the old mining tunnels beneath the southern continent. We've been maintaining human culture and knowledge in secret for over 800 years. 800 years. Captain Vasquez processed the implications with her quantum-enhanced cognition. These weren't just survivors, they were living repositories of human civilization who had maintained their identity through centuries of imperial oppression. "Stand by for extraction," Vasquez ordered. "We're coming to get you." The liberation of Kepler Prime's surface took less than 6 hours. The human battle group's advanced technology made short work of Imperial defensive positions, while specialized landing craft began the delicate process of evacuating the hidden human survivors. But, with each report from the surface, the true scope of Imperial crimes became clearer. "Captain, you need to see this," reported Major Torres, commander of the ground extraction team. His transmission came from deep within the tunnel complex where the survivors had hidden for centuries. "We've found the archives." The holographic display shifted to show vast underground chambers filled with carefully preserved artifacts, documents, and cultural treasures from old Earth and humanity's early colonial period. Books, art, music, scientific instruments, and personal belongings had been meticulously maintained by generations of caretakers who had sacrificed everything to preserve their heritage. They saved what they could when the empire began its cultural purging campaigns, Dr. Kim explained as she appeared beside Major Torres in the transmission. Every human world had groups like ours, trying to preserve some memory of who we were. Most were discovered and eliminated, but we were fortunate. The mining tunnels provided natural shielding from Imperial sensors. Captain Vasquez studied the archives with something approaching reverence. The Deep Fleet had preserved humanity's technological knowledge and military capabilities, but these survivors had maintained something equally precious, the soul of human civilization. There's more, Dr. Kim continued, her voice heavy with grief. We've maintained records of what happened to other human populations throughout Imperial space. The documentation of their crimes is extensive. The files that followed painted a picture of systematic genocide that exceeded even the Deep Fleet's estimates. Entire species that had allied with humanity had been exterminated. Worlds that had welcomed human refugees had been sterilized. The Empire hadn't just conquered human space, they had attempted to erase every trace of human influence from galactic history. They called it the cleansing, Dr. Kim explained. Any species that showed signs of adopting human technology, philosophy, or cultural practices was marked for elimination. They were terrified that human ideas would spread and undermine Imperial control. Lieutenant Commander Zhang's augmented features hardened with controlled rage. The Altarians. The Vegan Confederation. The Centauri Republic. They were all marked for elimination because they had adopted human governmental systems. 27 species, Captain Vasquez confirmed, accessing the Deep Fleet's historical databases. All extinct now. All because they had allied with us or adopted aspects of human culture. The scope of Imperial crimes was staggering, but it also provided valuable intelligence. The Empire hadn't just feared human military capabilities, they had been terrified of human ideas. Democracy, individual rights, scientific inquiry, cultural exchange, these concepts had spread throughout human space and taken root among dozens of species. The Empire's response had been to eliminate not just humans, but anyone who might carry forward human values. Captain, the communications officer reported, were receiving similar transmissions from across the battle group. Every liberated world has human survivors. Small populations, but they're there. Hidden, persecuted, but alive. The pattern was becoming clear. Despite 3,000 years of oppression, humans had survived throughout Imperial space. They had gone underground, literally and figuratively, maintaining their identity and culture in secret while waiting for salvation that many probably thought would never come. What are your orders regarding the survivors? Major Torres asked. It was a complex question. The Deep Fleet had evolved far beyond baseline humanity, their consciousness enhanced and their bodies augmented to function in the harsh environment of deep space. They were still human in spirit and memory, but they were something new, something that might seem alien to the populations they were liberating. Full integration protocols, Captain Vasquez decided. Anyone who wants to join the Deep Fleet will be offered enhancement procedures. Those who prefer to remain baseline human will be relocated to safe worlds outside Imperial space until we can restore their original homes. Ma'am, Dr. Kim interrupted, with respect, we don't want to be relocated. We want to fight. Vasquez looked at the elderly woman with her worn features and malnourished frame. Doctor, you've suffered enough. Let us handle the military operations. You don't understand, Dr. Kim replied firmly. We've been preparing for this day for 8 centuries. Every generation has maintained the resistance networks, preserved the intelligence files, and prepared for the moment when the fleet would return. We know Imperial systems better than you do. We know their weaknesses, their routines, their blind spots. The transmission shifted to show detailed schematics of Imperial installations, troop movements, and supply routes. The underground human networks had been gathering intelligence for centuries, building a comprehensive picture of Imperial operations across dozens of worlds. They never suspected us, Dr. Kim continued with grim satisfaction. To them, we were just another conquered species, broken and subservient. But we remembered everything. We documented their crimes, mapped their facilities, and identified their key personnel. We've been waiting 800 years to help you destroy them. Captain Vasquez realized that the Deep Fleet had been thinking too narrowly about their offensive operations. They had focused on military targets and industrial infrastructure, but the real key to defeating the Empire might be the human survivors who had spent centuries learning how to navigate Imperial society. "What do you need from us?" she asked. "Weapons, communication equipment, and transportation," Dr. Kim replied without hesitation. "We can coordinate uprisings on every world simultaneously. The Empire has thousands of garrison troops scattered across their territory, but they're designed to suppress conventional rebellions. They're not prepared for coordinated resistance backed by Deep Fleet technology." The tactical possibilities were staggering. Instead of conquering Imperial worlds one at a time, the Deep Fleet could trigger simultaneous uprisings across dozens of systems. Imperial forces would be overwhelmed by the sheer scope of the coordinated rebellion. "There's something else," Dr. Kim added, her expression darkening. "We know about the Omega Protocol." Lieutenant Commander Zhang's enhanced features went rigid. "Impossible. That information is classified at the highest levels of Imperial command. When you spend 8 centuries hiding in plain sight, you learn to see and hear things that powerful people assume you can't understand," Dr. Kim replied. "The Empire has a final solution planned if they face the prospect of total defeat. They call it the Omega Protocol, and it involves the systematic destruction of all non-Zephyrian life in the galaxy." The implications hit Captain Vasquez like a physical blow. The Empire wasn't just willing to commit genocide to maintain power, they had prepared to commit omnicide rather than accept defeat. "Details," she ordered. "Viral weapons designed to target non-Zephyrian DNA. They've been developing them for centuries, testing them on prisoner populations. If they face total defeat, they plan to release these weapons on every inhabited world in their territory." The holographic display showed biological warfare facilities hidden throughout Imperial space, each one capable of producing enough weaponized pathogens to sterilize entire worlds. The Empire's final act would be to take the rest of the galaxy down with them. "Estimated deployment time if they activate the protocol?" Vasquez asked. 72 hours from the decision to deploy. The weapons are already in position. Captain Vasquez felt the weight of 3,000 years of planning and preparation settling on her shoulders. The Deep Fleet had prepared for conventional warfare, technological challenges, and strategic complications. They hadn't prepared for the possibility that their enemies would rather destroy the galaxy than lose control of it. "We need to accelerate our timeline," she decided. "Signal Admiral Chan aboard the Retribution. The Empire is more desperate and more dangerous than we realized. If we give them time to recognize the inevitability of their defeat, they'll activate Omega Protocol." "What are your orders, Captain?" Lieutenant Commander Zhang asked. Vasquez looked out at the stars that had once belonged to humanity and its allies, worlds now held hostage by an empire willing to commit omnicide rather than accept defeat. The Deep Fleet would have to move faster, strike harder, and take greater risks than they had planned. But they would also have allies they hadn't expected. Hidden throughout Imperial space were the ghosts of old Earth, survivors who had maintained human culture and values through 8 centuries of oppression. They knew Imperial systems from the inside, and they were ready to fight. "Signal all battle groups," Captain Vasquez ordered. "We're moving to Phase 3 immediately. And prepare enhancement protocols for anyone who volunteers. We're going to need every human consciousness we can get." The liberation of Kepler Prime was just the beginning. The real war was about to start, and the fate of every living species in the galaxy hung in the balance. The war room aboard the Imperial Fortress world of Zirion Prime had become a monument to desperation. Supreme Admiral Thane Korvax stood before the massive holographic display showing the systematic collapse of the Zephyrian Empire, his 4 arms hanging limply at his sides as he absorbed the scope of the catastrophe unfolding across Imperial space. In the 72 hours since the humans had accelerated their offensive, 43 Imperial worlds had fallen to coordinated uprisings. Garrison forces that had maintained order for centuries were being overwhelmed by rebellions that seemed to know exactly when and where to strike. Worse yet, the human Deep Fleet was providing technological support that turned every uprising into a strategic nightmare. Status report, Thane Corvex ordered, though he already knew the news would be devastating. Intelligence Director SIXNAR stepped forward, her cybernetic eye dim with fatigue. The Tau Ceti sector has fallen completely. The Vega industrial complex is under siege. Our supply lines from the outer rim have been severed, and 3 of our primary shipyards have been destroyed. Our fleet strength? Down to 68% of pre-conflict levels. We're losing ships faster than we can replace them, and many of our remaining vessels are reporting supply shortages. 68%. In less than a week, humanity had crippled the military might that the Empire had spent 3 millennia building. But the numbers only told part of the story. The psychological impact was even more devastating. Desertion rates? Thane Corvex asked reluctantly. Approximately 15% and climbing. Many of our non-Zephyrian crews are refusing orders to engage human forces. Some have actively defected to the rebellion. The Empire's multi-species military had been one of its greatest strengths, drawing from dozens of conquered civilizations to create a vast and diverse fighting force. But now that diversity had become a weakness as species after species remembered their pre-conquest histories and chose to side with humanity. They're not just fighting us, Admiral Kekthera observed from her position at the tactical display. They're giving every oppressed species in our territory hope that the Empire can be defeated. We're facing a psychological collapse as much as a military one. Supreme Admiral Thane Corvex absorbed this analysis with the grim recognition that it was accurate. The Empire's control structure depended on the perception that resistance was futile, that imperial might was inevitable and unstoppable. The humans had shattered that perception in less than a week. Recommendations? He asked, though he suspected he already knew what his subordinates would suggest. Director SIXNAR exchanged glances with Admiral Kekthera before responding. There is one option we haven't discussed. The words hung in the air like poison. Every officer in the room knew what option she meant, and none of them wanted to be the first to speak it aloud. The Omega Protocol, Admiral Kekthera said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. Thane Corvex felt something cold settle in his chest. The Omega Protocol represented the darkest aspect of Imperial planning, a final solution developed by his predecessors for exactly this type of existential threat. It had been theoretical for so long that some officers had forgotten it existed. Casualty estimates, he asked. Total, Director SIXNAR replied without emotion. Every non-Zephyrian life form in Imperial space. Approximately 400 billion intelligent beings across 47 star systems. The numbers were beyond comprehension. 400 billion lives, representing dozens of species and thousands of unique cultures. The protocol would transform the Empire from a multi-species civilization into a wasteland populated only by Zephyrians ruling over empty worlds. Implementation timeline? 72 hours from activation. The viral weapons are already in position at key distribution points throughout Imperial space. Once released, they would spread through planetary atmospheres within 6 hours and maintain lethal concentrations for approximately 10 years. 10 years. Long enough to ensure that no survivors could emerge from hiding, that no species could develop immunities, that the galaxy would be cleansed of everything the Empire deemed threatening. Including human survivors hidden on Imperial worlds? Admiral Kekthera asked. Especially human survivors. The weapons were specifically designed to target human DNA sequences and any genetic patterns associated with their allied species. Supreme Admiral Thane Corvex studied the tactical display showing human battle groups moving through Imperial space with impunity. Their ships were technological marvels that outclassed Imperial vessels in every category. Their tactics were sophisticated beyond Imperial ability to counter. Their coordination with resistance movements was nearly perfect. But they were still biological. And biological organisms could be killed with the right weapons. Opposition to activation, he asked. Minimal, Director SIXNAR admitted reluctantly. The High Command Council has already voted. 13 in favor, 2 abstentions, 1 opposed. They're waiting for your authorization as Supreme Military Commander. 1 opposed. Thane Corvex wondered which of his colleagues had found the moral courage to vote against Omnicide, but he knew better than to ask. Such knowledge would only endanger the dissenter.
Legal authority?
Emergency powers granted under Imperial Code Section 777, Admiral Kekthera recited from memory. In the event of an existential threat to Zephyrian civilization, the Supreme Military Commander is authorized to take any action necessary to preserve the Empire's survival. The bureaucrats and lawyers had covered their tracks well. The protocol was technically legal under Imperial law, which meant that activating it would be an authorized military action rather than a war crime.
History would remember it as a desperate but legitimate response to an existential threat.
If there was anyone left alive to write that history. "Sir," a communication technician interrupted, "we're receiving a priority transmission from Admiral Chen aboard the human flagship." Thane Corvex paused in his deliberations.
On screen,
the face that appeared was the same human woman who had first announced humanity's return, but something had changed in her expression.
The cold satisfaction had been replaced by urgent concern. "Supreme Admiral Thane Corvex," she said without preamble, "we know about the Omega Protocol."
The war room fell silent.
The protocol was classified at the highest levels of Imperial security.
The fact that the humans knew of its existence suggested intelligence penetration far deeper than anyone had suspected. "I don't know what you're referring to," Thane Corvex replied carefully.
Admiral Chan's expression hardened. "Don't insult my intelligence. Biological weapons designed to target non-Zephyrian DNA.
Viral agents positioned at 47 distribution points throughout Imperial space.
Deployment time of 72 hours from activation."
The accuracy of her information was terrifying. The humans didn't just know about the protocol, they knew operational details that should have been accessible only to the highest levels of Imperial command. Even if such a protocol existed, Thane Corvex said slowly, it would represent a legitimate defensive measure against an invading force.
Defensive measure? Admiral Chan's voice carried disbelief.
"You're talking about committing genocide against 400 billion innocent beings because you can't accept that your empire is finished.
Those beings are in rebellion against lawful Imperial authority.
They have chosen to side with an invading force rather than maintain their loyalty to the empire that has protected and provided for them."
Protected? Admiral Chan's laugh was bitter. "You enslaved them.
You destroyed their cultures, stole their resources, and used them as cannon fodder for your expansion wars.
They're not rebelling against protection, they're fighting for freedom." The philosophical debate was pointless, and both officers knew it.
The Empire would never accept human values of individual liberty and self-determination, just as humanity would never accept Imperial concepts of hierarchical order and species-based supremacy.
"What do you want?" Thane Corvex asked. "Surrender.
Unconditional surrender of all Imperial forces, followed by the establishment of a transitional government that will oversee the peaceful dissolution of the Empire and the restoration of independence to all conquered species."
In exchange for? "We don't activate our own ultimate weapon." The words hit the war room like a physical shock. The humans had their own ultimate weapon?
Intelligence had detected no such capability in their deep fleet, despite extensive analysis of their technology.
"Elaborate," Thane Corvex ordered. Admiral Chan's image was replaced by a stellar cartography display showing the Zirian system. At first, nothing seemed unusual. Then, the display zoomed in on Zirian Prime's sun, and the horror became apparent. Something was inside the star.
Massive geometric structures that hadn't been there before were embedded in the stellar core, their exotic energy signatures causing barely detectable fluctuations in the sun's output. "Stellar engineering," Admiral Chen explained matter-of-factly. "We've placed quantum manipulation devices inside your primary stars. If activated, they will destabilize stellar fusion and cause controlled nova events."
The implications were staggering.
The humans had somehow infiltrated Imperial star systems and deployed weapons inside the stars themselves. Such technology exceeded even the Empire's wildest theoretical projections. "Impossible," Admiral Kekthera whispered. "The temperatures and pressures inside a stellar core would destroy any known material." "Any material known to you," Admiral Chen corrected.
"We've had 3,000 years to develop technologies you can't imagine."
Exotic matter, quantum manipulation, dimensional engineering, these are tools we've been perfecting since your predecessors drove us into exile.
How many stars? Thane Corvex asked, though he dreaded the answer.
Every star in Imperial space.
47 systems, 47 potential novas.
We can activate them individually or simultaneously, depending on your response to our surrender demand.
The war room erupted in chaos as officers tried to process the magnitude of the threat.
The humans weren't just threatening to defeat the Empire, they were threatening to make it physically impossible for Zephyrian civilization to exist. You're bluffing, Director Sixnar said, but her voice lacked conviction.
Am I? Admiral Chan's image returned to the display.
Would you like a demonstration? We can cause a small flare from your star, something that won't damage the planet but will prove our capability. As she spoke, Zirian Prime's sun brightened noticeably in the sky outside the fortress. The flare lasted only seconds, but it was enough to confirm that the humans had weapons beyond Imperial comprehension. You see, Admiral Chen continued conversationally, we learned an important lesson from our first encounter with your Empire. You can't negotiate with a species that views compromise as weakness and sees genocide as a legitimate policy option.
The only language you understand is superior firepower.
Supreme Admiral Thane Corvex stared at the display showing stellar manipulation technology that defied everything he understood about physics and engineering. The humans had spent 3,000 years developing not just weapons of war, but weapons of cosmic destruction. Your terms? He asked quietly.
Complete and immediate surrender.
All Imperial forces will stand down and submit to human authority.
The Omega Protocol will be permanently deactivated under human supervision.
All conquered species will be granted immediate independence and provided with reparations from Imperial resources.
And if we refuse? Admiral Chen's expression became pitiless. Then, we turn your stars into weapons and sterilize every Zephyrian world in the galaxy. Your species will face the same extinction you've inflicted on so many others.
The parallels were obvious and intentional. The humans were offering the Empire the same choice that Imperial forces had given to countless civilizations over the millennia, surrender or die. I need time to consult with my government, Thane Corvex said.
You have 1 hour, Admiral Chen replied.
After that, we begin the countdown to stellar activation.
The transmission ended, leaving the war room in shocked silence.
For 3,000 years, the Zephyrian Empire had been the dominant military power in the galaxy.
Their fleets had been unstoppable, their weapons unmatched, their will unbreakable.
But they had never faced an enemy that could weaponize stars themselves.
Orders, Supreme Admiral? Admiral Kekthara asked quietly.
Thane Corvex looked around the room at officers who had served the Empire faithfully for decades, soldiers who had believed in Imperial supremacy and the righteousness of their cause. Now they faced a choice between genocide and extinction, between becoming monsters or becoming extinct.
Signal the High Command Council, he said finally. Emergency session in 30 minutes.
As the officers filed out to prepare for what might be the final meeting in Imperial history, Thane Corvex remained alone with the tactical display showing humanity's deep fleet. They had underestimated humans 3,000 years ago, treating them as just another species to be conquered and forgotten. Now they were learning that some mistakes could never be corrected.
Only survived. If they were lucky. 6 months after the Empire's surrender, Admiral Chen stood on the observation deck of the rebuilt Kepler Prime orbital station, watching as the first generation of truly free ships launched from the planet's restored shipyards.
These weren't human vessels or alien craft built under Imperial oppression, they were something entirely new. Ships designed by liberated species working together, combining the best technologies and ideas from dozens of civilizations. The surrender had come with less than 10 minutes remaining on the human ultimatum. Supreme Admiral Thane Corvex had transmitted the Empire's unconditional capitulation while Imperial fleets across 47 star systems simultaneously powered down their weapons and accepted human oversight. The Omega Protocol's biological weapons had been secured and destroyed under careful supervision, while the stellar manipulation devices remained in place as insurance against any resurgence of Imperial militarism. Remarkable how quickly things can change when people are allowed to work together instead of being forced to compete, observed Captain Elena Vasquez, her consciousness now inhabiting a new synthetic body that allowed her to interact more naturally with baseline humans.
Admiral Chen nodded, studying the construction yards where Altarian engineers worked alongside human designers and vegan technicians.
These were species that had been extinct for over 2,000 years according to imperial records, but the truth had been more complex. Small populations had survived in hidden enclaves or as integrated members of other civilizations, maintaining their cultural knowledge while waiting for an opportunity to reclaim their heritage. The restoration projects are ahead of schedule, reported Commander Torres, now serving as liaison between the Deep Fleet and the planetary reconstruction efforts.
Kepler Prime's ecosystem should be fully restored within 2 years. The atmospheric processors are working better than expected. It was a miracle of sorts. 3,000 years of imperial industrial exploitation had left Kepler Prime a polluted wasteland, its oceans poisoned and its atmosphere toxic. But human technology developed during the long exile included environmental restoration capabilities that could undo centuries of damage. Combined with knowledge preserved by underground human survivors and contributed by liberated alien species, the restoration efforts were transforming dead worlds back into garden planets. Any word from the Zephyrian Integration Council? Admiral Chen asked.
Mixed progress, Commander Torres admitted. About 40% of the Zephyrian population has accepted the new governmental structure and is cooperating with the transition. Another 40% is passively resistant but not actively hostile.
The remaining 20%
still believe they're destined to rule the galaxy, Captain Vasquez finished.
What's the current security status? 17 underground resistance cells identified and monitored.
They're mostly ineffective, their technology is centuries behind ours, and they have no support among the general population.
The bigger challenge is psychological integration. This was perhaps the most complex aspect of the post-Empire transition.
The Zephyrian species had spent 3 millennia believing they were naturally superior to all other forms of life, that their dominance was both inevitable and justified. Adjusting to a galaxy where they were merely one species among many was proving psychologically traumatic for many individuals. The education programs are helping, Torres continued. Younger Zephyrians seem more adaptable. It's the older generations, especially former military and administrative personnel, who are having the most difficulty accepting the new reality.
Admiral Chen understood their struggle, though she felt little sympathy for it.
The Empire's collapse had been as swift and total as its rise had been gradual and methodical. Within weeks, a civilization that had dominated the galaxy for millennia found itself reduced to a single homeworld under international supervision.
Incoming transmission from Earth, announced the station's communication officer. Admiral Chen felt something that might have been surprise.
Earth, or rather, the restored Earth, had been humanity's most ambitious reconstruction project. The planet's destruction 3,000 years ago had been so complete that rebuilding it had required technologies that bordered on the miraculous. But the Deep Fleet had possessed those technologies, developed during their long exile among the stars.
On screen,
the face that appeared belonged to President Martinez, the first elected leader of the restored Earth government. Like many humans who had chosen to return to baseline humanity rather than accept Deep Fleet augmentation, she appeared startlingly young and vibrant compared to the enhanced humans who now made up the majority of humanity's population.
Admiral Chen, I wanted to personally thank you and the Deep Fleet for making this possible.
President Martinez gestured to something off-screen, and the display expanded to show the restored city of New Geneva, its crystalline spires rising from landscapes that bloomed with Earth-native vegetation under a blue sky that hadn't existed for 3 millennia.
It's beautiful, Admiral Chen said, and meant it. The reconstruction hadn't simply rebuilt old Earth, it had created something new, incorporating the best aspects of human civilization while avoiding the mistakes that had led to the original planet's vulnerability.
The first wave of colonists from the liberated worlds arrived yesterday, President Martinez continued.
Representatives from 37 species have requested permission to establish communities on Earth. They want to be part of whatever humanity builds next.
This was unexpected but not unwelcome. The Deep Fleet's original plan had focused on restoring human civilization and establishing defensive capabilities to prevent future imperial aggression. But the liberation had revealed something neither humans nor their enemies had anticipated: the extent to which human ideas and values had spread throughout the galaxy despite 3 millennia of imperial suppression. Democracy, individual rights, scientific inquiry, cultural exchange, cooperative problem-solving, these concepts hadn't died with the fall of human space. They had gone underground, preserved by species that had never forgotten what freedom felt like.
Now, with the Empire gone, those ideas were emerging everywhere at once. How many applications for Federation membership have we received? Admiral Chen asked.
43 so far, President Martinez replied.
Including applications from worlds that were never part of the original human sphere of influence. Species that learned about human governmental systems secondhand but chose to adopt them anyway. The implications were staggering.
Rather than simply restoring the pre-empire status quo, the liberation was creating something entirely new: a voluntary federation of species united by shared values rather than conquest or coercion. The Constitutional Convention is scheduled to begin next month, President Martinez continued. We'll need deep fleet representation to address questions of technology sharing, defense coordination, and enhancement policies.
Enhancement policies. That was perhaps the most sensitive issue facing the post-Empire galaxy.
The Deep Fleet's consciousness transfer and physical augmentation technologies offered capabilities that baseline humans could barely imagine, but they also raised fundamental questions about the nature of humanity itself.
I'll assign a delegation, Admiral Chen promised.
But remember, the Deep Fleet serves all of humanity, not just the enhanced portion.
Whatever we build going forward needs to work for everyone. After the transmission ended, Admiral Chen remained on the observation deck, watching ships and shuttles move between the orbital station and the planet below.
Some carried baseline humans returning to their restored homeworld. Others transported augmented consciousness from the Deep Fleet taking physical form for the first time in centuries. Still others brought representatives from liberated species eager to participate in building something better than what the Empire had offered.
Penny for your thoughts?
Captain Vasquez asked, using an ancient Earth idiom that predated the Empire by thousands of years.
I'm thinking about cycles, Admiral Chen replied.
3,000 years ago, the Empire crushed human civilization because they were afraid of what we represented. Now we've crushed the Empire for essentially the same reason.
How do we make sure this cycle doesn't just repeat with us as the oppressors? It was the question that haunted every enhanced human consciousness in the Deep Fleet. They possessed technological capabilities that exceeded imperial achievements by orders of magnitude.
They could manipulate matter at the quantum level, weaponize stellar physics, and transfer consciousness between different forms of existence.
Such power could easily corrupt, turning liberators into a new generation of tyrants. By remembering what we're fighting for, Vasquez said simply.
The Empire fought to dominate and control. We fought to liberate and restore.
As long as we keep that distinction clear, we'll be fine. And if we don't?
Vasquez was quiet for a long moment, processing the question with quantum-enhanced cognition that could consider thousands of variables simultaneously. Then, the galaxy will find a way to stop us, just like we found a way to stop the Empire. Maybe that's the real lesson here: no form of power is permanent, no matter how advanced or how justified. Admiral Chen considered this as she watched a transport ship carrying former Imperial prisoners being released to their home worlds. These were species that had been enslaved for centuries, their cultures nearly destroyed, their hope almost extinguished. But they had survived, preserved their essential nature despite everything the Empire had done to them.
Status report from the Outer Rim territories, she asked.
All Imperial garrison forces have withdrawn or been integrated into local defense militias, Commander Torres reported. The transition governments are functioning normally, and resource redistribution is proceeding ahead of schedule. Resource redistribution was perhaps the most practical challenge facing the post-Empire galaxy.
For 3 millennia, wealth and resources had flowed toward the Imperial core worlds while the periphery was strip-mined and exploited.
Reversing that flow required delicate negotiations, advanced logistics, and sometimes direct intervention when local power structures resisted change.
Any requests for Deep Fleet assistance? 3 systems have requested help with environmental restoration. 2 want technological assistance in rebuilding their industrial base. One has asked for military protection against pirate groups operating from former imperial strongholds. Pirates.
That was an inevitable consequence of any major political collapse, criminal organizations emerging to fill the power vacuum left by retreating authorities.
But these weren't ordinary pirates.
Many were former imperial military units that had refused surrender and chosen to operate as independent raiders rather than accept the new galactic order.
Threat assessment?
Minimal to moderate, Torres replied. Their ships are outdated, their supply lines are limited, and they have no popular support.
More of a nuisance than a genuine threat.
But still dangerous to civilian populations, Admiral Chen observed.
Authorization granted for anti-piracy operations. Rules of engagement?
Capture when possible, eliminate when necessary, Captain Vasquez suggested. We want to set the precedent that the post-Empire galaxy will be protected, but we don't want to be seen as trigger-happy.
It was a delicate balance.
The Deep Fleet's technological advantages made them nearly invincible in conventional combat, but military supremacy alone wouldn't build the kind of civilization they wanted to create.
They needed to demonstrate that power could be exercised responsibly, that strength could coexist with justice.
Admiral, the communication officer interrupted, we're receiving a priority transmission from the Zephyrian homeworld.
Admiral Chen exchanged glances with her officers.
Communications from Zephyr Prime were always tense, as the planet struggled with its transition from imperial capital to occupied territory under international administration.
On screen, the figure who appeared was not what anyone had expected.
Former Supreme Admiral Thane Corvex, the Zephyrian officer who had surrendered the Empire, stood in what appeared to be a simple office rather than a military command center. He wore civilian clothing instead of his ceremonial armor, and his expression carried none of the arrogant supremacy that had characterized imperial leadership.
Admiral Chen, he said with what seemed like genuine respect, I wanted to report the results of the War Crimes Tribunal.
The trials had been controversial from the beginning. Many liberated species had demanded immediate execution for all imperial leadership, while others had advocated for truth and reconciliation processes. The compromise solution involved trials overseen by representatives from all affected species, with sentences determined by the scope and nature of each individual's crimes.
Proceed, Admiral Chen said.
734 former imperial officials have been convicted of crimes against sentience, Thane Corvex reported.
Sentences range from supervised community service to life imprisonment.
No death sentences were imposed, per the wishes of the human delegation. The decision to oppose capital punishment had been difficult but important. Humans had fought to end the Empire's cycle of violence, not to perpetuate it with new executions. Justice had to mean more than revenge, even when revenge seemed justified.
What about your own status? Admiral Chen asked.
I've been sentenced to spend the remainder of my life working on restoration projects throughout former Imperial space, Thane Corvex replied. The tribunal determined that my cooperation during the surrender and transition processes warranted leniency, but that my role in maintaining Imperial oppression required meaningful consequences. It was perhaps the perfect sentence, meaningful punishment that also contributed to repairing the damage that Imperial policies had caused. Thane Corvex would spend his remaining years helping to rebuild what the Empire had destroyed, a living reminder that even those who had enforced oppression could choose to work toward justice.
How is the Zephyrian population adapting? Captain Vasquez asked.
Slowly but genuinely, Thane Corvex admitted. The education programs have been particularly effective with younger generations.
They're learning about the civilizations we destroyed, the cultures we erased, the achievements we suppressed. It's sobering. And the older generations? More resistant, but not unchangeable.
When people see the prosperity and cooperation emerging in the liberated territories, when they understand that freedom doesn't mean chaos, attitudes begin to shift.
Admiral Chen studied the former Imperial commander with enhanced senses that could detect stress, deception, and emotional states. What she saw was genuine remorse, honest commitment to change, and something that might have been hope. Thank you for the report, she said. Is there anything else?
Yes, Thane Corvex replied quietly.
I wanted to apologize.
Not as a representative of the Empire or as part of any official process, but personally. I spent 60 years believing that might made right, that conquest was justified by victory, that some species were naturally superior to others.
I was wrong about everything that mattered.
The apology hung in the air between them, bridging 3,000 years of hatred and mistrust. Admiral Chen had never expected to hear such words from a former Imperial officer, had never imagined that the species that had tried to exterminate humanity could acknowledge the magnitude of their crimes. Apology accepted, she said finally.
The question now is what we all build together going forward.
After the transmission ended, the three officers stood in comfortable silence, watching the traffic patterns around Kepler Prime as the rebuilt world continued its transformation from imperial wasteland to thriving center of interspecies cooperation.
Do you think we've really won? Commander Torres asked eventually. Admiral Chen considered the question with quantum-enhanced cognition that could process implications across multiple timelines and probability matrices.
The Empire was gone, humanity was restored, and dozens of species were building new civilizations based on freedom and cooperation. By any conventional measure, they had achieved total victory. But victory in war was different from success in peace. The real test would come in the generations ahead, as the children of liberated worlds grew up in a galaxy where cooperation was possible and freedom was protected.
Ask me in 100 years, she said finally.
But, for now, we've given the galaxy something it hasn't had in 3 millennia, hope. Above them, the first interspecies exploration vessel launched from Kepler Prime's shipyards, carrying a mixed crew of humans, former imperial species, and representatives from newly liberated civilizations. Their mission was to explore the regions beyond known space, to discover what lay beyond the boundaries of the old empire. Whatever they found out there, they would face it together. And that, Admiral Chen realized, was perhaps the greatest victory of all. The ancient Earth battleships had returned, not just to reclaim what was lost, but to build something better than what had existed before.
The age of empires was ending. The age of cooperation was just beginning.